Tomorrow is the Reform Party conference. And we know what that means, don't we? All day, the entire news bulletin will be taken up by Nigel Farage. Every station will carry his speech live and then do analysis of it all day afterwards. And we know what Farage is going to say. He's going to blame all of our problems on Muslims and asylum seekers and human rights. And he's going to do what he does best, which is lay a claim representing the views of the majority, when we know that he absolutely doesn't represent the views of the majority. Listen, I don't think that Farage's speech shouldn't be covered. I don't think that his opinion shouldn't have a space in our discussion. But we know for a fact that he gets a disproportionate amount of coverage, and that also his views are treated as disruptive views, which justifies their position as newsworthy. When, to be blunt, there's a fag paper between Nigel Farage's position and the Tory position, either when they were in government or right now. And frankly, they're also being echoed in large part by the current Labour government. That is, I'm talking about offshore detention centres for migrants, talking about smashing the gangs and stopping the boats. It's all the same stuff, right? So what we have essentially across our politics and enabled by our media is three parties that, at least on migration, are very, very similar and very right-wing. And they represent this sort of Westminster consensus that actually doesn't represent the whole of the country or even a significant majority of the country at all. Farage styles himself as the outsider, but he's really the ultimate insider, and his views and opinions are reflected and repeated throughout all of our elite institutions, from the top of our government to the top of the previous government to the vast majority of our major newspapers and news programs as well. So it's complete rubbish. But one thing that got me thinking was that during the election, right, we saw a lot of Farage. In fact, there's evidence that we saw more of Farage disproportionately than we saw of any of the other party leaders, which, again, just plays into this sort of media enabling of increasingly far-right discourse in our country. But I got to be honest, during the election campaign, it didn't seem to get to me as much, and I did think about why that was. And the truth was that during the election campaign, there are strict rules. Broadcasters therefore had to show you also the perspectives of the Green Party, Lib Dems, SNP, and Plaid Cymru, all of whom represent a totally different and alternative way of approaching migration, one that represents a very significant part of the country, a more humane, compassionate and realistic approach to migration, and that we must make that work for our communities. What we had during the election campaign was we had a whole lot of Farage and Tories and Labour and all of their anti-migrant bigotry and hate, but it was balanced. It was balanced by the alternative. So when I was thinking about how am I going to deal with Nigel Farage taking over the news again tomorrow, I decided to go and look at what Ed Davey said at the Lib Dem conference that has just finished and inevitably didn't receive the same kind of attention that we know Farage is going to get, and we know the Tories are going to get, and obviously Labour as the government will get as well. He ended speaking about the riots and our values for our country, and one of the things he did was he directly addressed ethnic minority Britons and Muslim Britons.
Let me say to all of you from Muslim and ethnic minority communities who watched in fear as those awful scenes unfolded, who were forced to ask whether it was safe to step out onto your own streets, to go into your own city centres, or to pray at your own mosques. We stand with you. You should always feel safe, and we will work with you to tackle the appalling scourge of Islamophobia and racism.
Listen, it's not bad. He names anti-Muslim bigotry as its own form of racism that is a particular problem in this country. Show me the other political leaders of the mainstream parties that is doing that. Muslims deserve to be addressed by our political leaders at the current time. And so do all racialized minorities in this country. But we seem to have swept aside the fact that people were intimidated from leaving their very own homes and going out onto the street in our country just a few short weeks ago by racist terrorists. Davey also stood up for principles of human rights and talked about migration just in a positive way.
Our party believes that basic rights and dignity are the birthright of every individual. Our party celebrates Britain's diversity as a great strength. Our country thrives when it is open and outward-looking.
Listen, I don't subscribe to any political party in particular, and I'm not saying the Lib Dems are in any way perfect or that Ed Davey is like that amazing, but these are some bare minimum requirements that he is fulfilling. He is treating people like human beings. He is addressing racism and extremism, which is such a major threat to our democracy and our rights at the current time. I think that he deserves a bit more of our attention, or at least those alternative perspectives that we never hear do.